our questions are not new. And as a result, this is where experience must come in, that you have been studying these poems and looked at past exam question papers, and therefore it will be easier to handle. Please dissect your poetry. I would really advise learners that if we are going to do thorough justice for It's a Beauticious Evening, Calm and Free, at a Funeral, This Winter Coming, and Solitude, do justice and move on to the next 4. And finally, the next 4 is 3 batches so that you can close off the syllabus before the year ends. Facts must be given. We analyzed poems in class, line by line analysis was done, tones, themes, the relevance of the title were done. So as a result, there is nothing that is new. Figures of speech were done, diction was done, and as a result, people must be willing to say, whatever question comes in the examination, I must be able to answer it. It doesn't matter which question, which poem has an essay. If you know your poem, you'll be able to adapt to any essay question that comes. Our essay question was on It is a Beauticious Evening, Calm and Free by William Wordsworth. And as we know the drill, one of the things that are very important for us to understand is that this is an Italian sonnet. And as a result, if it's an Italian sonnet, as you are looking at the question, a flashback must happen to you to say, when I'm dealing with It is a Beauticious Evening, I have this type of content. And as a result, it means that this structure is this way, and I must be able to touch this. So we need people to understand that this Petrarchan sonnet or Italian sonnet basically deals with exploring the beauty of nature and its connection to spirituality. When we look at the 2 parts of the sonnet, line 1 to 9, line 8, which is our octave, deals with the beauty of nature. And the connection to spirituality happens in line 9 to 14. When we talk of the tranquil evening setting, and the addressing of the daughter, to emphasize that she is automatically spiritually connected to the divine. And as a result, though she may not be realizing it, we need to understand that the octave has its own description of beauty. The sestet shifts everything, shifts the content, shifts the tone. We now focus on the speaker's daughter, who looks unaffected by the scene's beauty and tranquil state. And as a result, the speaker now assures her, as the father, that her spiritual connection is not diminished, as she is always in God's presence, even though she doesn't consciously acknowledges it or is aware of it. We must try to make sure that this comes into the examination with you, and you are able to now talk about the innocence, the divine presence, and as a result, the rhyme scheme, the imagery of the nun, and as a result, these are the things that we must be giving in as a reflection of knowing what you are going to answer when it comes to this poem. If you are coming to this time of the year and you still are not able to dissect your poem in just 5 minutes, it means that you might still need to study your poetry further, and as a result, you have a lot of work to do. I believe time has never been a factor. If you are willing to do something, you will do it if you want to. And I will advise people that please, can we study our poetry section? Because these 20 marks are valuable to you in the exam. All right, let's begin with our paper. When we came to It is a Beauticious Evening, Calm and Free, we had an essay question. In this poem by Wordsworth, the speaker is awestruck by the beauty of and glory of nature. So as a result, I always advise learners that when you come into the exam, please let's try and identify the key words in the question by the beauty and glory of nature. And as a result, we need now to discuss this with relevance to 1, diction, imagery, and structure. So those are the things that we are going to focus on today. And as such, it's very important that you must understand that you have to touch on every element in the question. And then you will not be able to lose any marks. What do? We have to find all the diction that shows the speaker is awestruck by the beauty of nature, the beauty and glory of nature. And as a result, we also look for the imagery which shows us that the speaker is awestruck by the beauty and glory of nature. We do the same for the structure. Which parts of the structure are relevant for us to touch on today? When we come to It Is a Beauticious Evening, this is what we're going to do. It says 250 to 300 words, roughly one page. It is still 10 marks, and though learners just fear it because they still fear the unknown, but I believe it has an advantage over contextual questions. And I would recommend that you answer the essay questions for you to get marks, because it is easier to handle than the contextual questions in an exam. Let's begin our breaking down. When we come to the poem, we are looking at diction is particular words or phrases that make an impact. It is a beauticious evening, calm and free, they say. The holy time is quiet and none. Breathless with adoration, the broad sun sinking down in its tranquility. The gentleness and heaven broods over the sea. Listen, the mighty being is awake. And doth with his eternal motion make a sound like thunder everlastingly. Dear child, that walkest with me here. That's where our Volta is, the switch and the turnaround in the poem. If thou appear untouched by solemn thought, thy nature is not therefore less divine. Thou liest in Abram's bosom all the year, and it says, and worshippest at the temple's inner shrine, God being with thee when we know it not. So this is what we are going to look at today, and try and look at the three things that are aligning to the question and how we can get them from the poem. Right, let's begin. Right. When we're coming to this poem, there are words that we are going to touch. Because it shows the elevated beauty of nature. And I believe one of them is breathless with adoration. So as a result, that's one that is, we'll start with beauteous evening, breathless with adoration. I believe we have the broad sun, tranquility, and I believe broods over the sea. Listen, the mighty being is awake, and doth with his eternal motion make a sound like thunder everlastingly. When we're talking about the beauty and the glory of nature, I believe when we say it is a beauticious evening, we are saying it's not just a beautiful time, it's just a grand splendor. So as a result, these are the things that I need us to focus on when we're talking about the comments that you will give to this poem. It's not just beautiful. He says it's a grand splendor, which shows admiration in Wordsworth. It shows admiration in Wordsworth, which gives us the evening's appearance to him at what he is seeing. And now when we come also to talk about when he calls the time holy, I believe I will take holy as well, because there are a lot that were relevant. he labels the time as holy. And when he labels the time as holy, what does he do? He gives it a sense of sacredness. A sense of sacredness is given here. And now when we're coming in, it invites reflection on the beauty that he's looking at. When he comes in and says, breathless with adoration, that's personification without fail. When we say it's personification, he personifies the evening, and therefore it shows that the emotional response is deep emotional response is what we are getting here. Overwhelming as well, I think it can also come in. That's also relevant. It can't be expressed by just simple breath. So those are the things that we are saying you must be able to comment on when you are coming into the essay and give us an indication that you know what we are talking about. When we are going to talk about words like tranquility, as we move on, is sinking down in its tranquility. This is an indication of serenity, peace. So that's what is implied there. So I believe when we come in and we have roots, is in the next line, that is personification as well. So as a result, I believe that's how you dissect and be able to have a countdown afterwards to say, what do I have? Where's my imagery? Where is this? Where is my diction? I believe it will come out clearly. Because when you say roots, heaven is given qualities of being overprotective. When heaven is given qualities of overprotective, it shows the divine nurturing force of nature. I believe I'm going to talk about everlastingly now. This is the idea of eternity. So when we're saying it's the idea of eternity, it's a powerful presence. The powerful presence which suggests immortality, magnificence. So as a result, there are so many things you could have said. So that's why I will just break down and say, you give your diction word, you comment on it, you give your imagery, you comment on it. And as a result, I believe that's what we are talking about when we come to this. We also have a contrast of the child's innocence between the child's innocence and the speaker's O, as we said in the question, between the octave and the sestet, because it emphasizes how pure the experience is, portraying the child as a natural divine embodiment, even though she is not aware of it. So these are the things that we're expecting you to bring in when we talk about these things. I believe we also had mighty being. I'm seeing it now when we are also, I talked about the uh, everlasting. I believe this is an omnipresent divine force. So as a result, you had so many things to give. I believe roughly 3 or 4 diction words are enough. So you don't have to struggle at all, because I think I've commented on almost 1, 2, 3, 4 diction words. And as a result, those are the things that we are talking about. I say this is an omnipresent, eternal divine force. These are the things that show how awestruck by the beauty and glory of nature Wordsworth is. I'm now going to touch on the structure, I believe, when we look at Italian sonnet without fail. Italian sonnet is what we are going to mention, which allows Wordsworth, allows the poet to focus on the beauty of nature, and I believe also it allows him also in the, which is in the octave. In the octave, let's be very clear, because it's divided. Then in the sestet, to compare or contrast or compare the glory of nature with the beauty, with the daughter's beauty. Right. So these are the things that we expect to be given. It's 10 marks, so which means that it's only 250 to 300 words. You will be done. And that's why I keep saying, try these essays, practice them for each and every essay so that you can be able to get this right. Let's go to the second question. At a Funeral by Dennis Brutus. The majority of learners were not expecting this because it was in most of the June papers, but still here we are. We are having it coming a second time, which is a bonus, I believe. Explain the word pageantry in line 1 in the context of the poem, right? Remember when we talked of pageantry, we are talking of a ceremony, display, or a ceremony. And we're talking of a display or ceremony that is excessive. It's just for show. It has no meaning. And these are the things that we expected. As a result, we're saying elaborate display, just for show, excessive display, a ceremony that has no meaning. And as a result, that's why it becomes hollow. So those are the things that we are expecting you to know when it comes to pageantry. As such, when we say the regalia that is one academic clothing, which was for display, will also be relevant there. Explain the effect of the punctuation mark in salute. Salute, then ponder on this hollow panoply. I believe when we have the exclamation mark, we must understand it is an imperative command. So as a result, it commands. If it commands, I believe what it does, it is a command to honor the deceased. Do we call them the deceased? Yes, to honor the deceased, and as such, as one would honor a soldier. So those were the two things that we expected. Refer to line 10, not death, but death's head tyranny guides our ground. This has been in so many previous question papers, even in the poetry booklets, it's always there. So it's something that should be ringing out for people to say, it's coming back and forth in the questions, different wording, but same question all the same. And it's very important for learners to try and align themselves to say, I need to know such questions because I've seen them so many times. I believe when we talk about death heads, tyranny guides our ground, we are saying, it says identify the figure of speech first. It is definitely a metaphor. And therefore it says comment on the effectiveness of this image. I believe we're talking about the issue that the oppressive, the oppression, I'll call it the oppression, is compared to a death's head, which is a skull. And therefore, when we are talking about this, the tyranny, the harsh, cruel conditions of the oppressive system and ruling was what the tyranny referred to. So tyranny was referring to the cruelty, harshness of the apartheid system. And as such, we are saying this is in reference to the Grim Reaper, which was the role models of the apartheid police, and as such, you have to remember these things. So as a result, death-like existence is what is being referred to in this metaphor. Under the apartheid system, they live a death-like experience or existence, and that's where now you had to be understanding the effectiveness. Refer to line 2:12, better that we should die than we should lie down. Critically discuss the effectiveness of this line as a conclusion to the poem. I believe with effect from last year, we have been having these questions whereby they separate the figure of speech and you comment on the effectiveness. And the last line is always based on the conclusion of the poem based on the last line. So these have been very common since from the year 2024. And as such, I believe, look at the trends, and as a result, you'll be able to prepare yourself to say you are dealing with the current way of questioning, which is the technique of the exams, right? When we're coming into this one, better that we should lie down than we should die, than that we should lie down. Death is preferable. I believe it's a better option, is a better option than accepting the tyranny of the apartheid system. It was 3 marks, so we had to go all out. We are saying it is effective because we have to answer the question, critically discuss the effectiveness. As it sums up, it is the concluding line. The preference to a revolution to fight the oppressive system. There's our 3 marks. It is an effective conclusion because it calls for a revolution so that they can be able to fight the system than to accept the tyranny, which is the lie down part. So that's what we had for this poem. We're going on to our question number 3, which is this winter coming, or explain the use of the word thick in line 1. The word thick, it shows the heaviness of the rain. I saw common answers being heaviness of the rain, which is very correct, heaviness of the rain. And I believe now we had to move to the figurative element and talk about which implies an oppressive atmosphere, difficult times, or oppressive atmosphere, anything was relevant for there. So as a result, that's why we are explaining the use of the word. 3.2, account for the repetition of the phrase, who is not frightened, throughout the poem. We all know there is no way you can touch on repetition without talking about emphasis. So the repetition emphasizes the dominant fear by people or everyone due to the oppressive atmosphere. It was 2 marks, I believe. So as a result, what does it do? Impending violence emphasizes the impending violence is the result of this fear. Remember, this is based on the state of emergency. So therefore, the fear that is instilled is due to the impending violence that will be brought by the retaliation of the apartheid police when the Black people decide to go ahead with commemorating the 10 years of the June 16 uprisings. Identify the figure of speech in the C is in line 4 to 5, they said. I believe when we're talking about this one, it's definitely personification. Comment on the effectiveness of this image. It is the power and destructiveness. The sand is sinking away. The power of nature, which is also destructive. Bringing chaos, instability. Those are the answers that will fall in here. Right, refer to lines 24 to 29. It said, into the rain, the children are running. Thin as the barest twigs, they kindly have fire to fight the winter. Their bare bodies, a raging fire of dead children, and the sky collapsing under centuries of rain, the wind like a mountain crying. Who is not frightened of this winter coming upon us now? It says, critically discuss how the final stanza reinforces the central message of the poem. When we're coming to the final stanza, we are given the symbolism of the children. It's definitely the symbolism of the children. And what we are talking about is that they are the symbol of innocence. Under the cruel apartheid system. But the word, the diction word raging, I believe, raging fire, shows us that diction word raging fire shows us that the passion of these children is recognized, though they die, trying to bring change. During the apartheid era. So when we're coming in, they are given an imagery of being thin as the barest twigs. And now we're coming in and saying suffering, the extent of suffering and poverty is seen through these lines as well. So those were the things that could have come in. We go to our next poem, which is question 4, which is the last of the prescribed poems. And we are having Solitude. Oh, the juxtaposition in this poem is dominant, and as a result, that's how learners are remembering it now in the exam, though they still run away from answering it. Honestly, professionally, my opinion will be I felt Solitude will be better answering it because a lot of learners misinterpret winter coming, and therefore it will be an easier option. Explain how the first two lines offer a comment on the fickle nature of people. I remember an essay that talked about the nature of human beings, and as a result, the essay question was in the previous exam papers. And as such, that's where you must realize that there is a common denominator between question papers and now, because there will always be a repetition of questions. When we're coming in, we are saying the nature of people is that they are only attracted to happiness and happy people. Only attracted to happiness or happy people. But when we're coming in, we are saying, but sadness is in isolation or solitude. People are uncaring. That's a fickle nature of people. And as a result, that's why they will not deal with our problems. Explain the effect of the word sigh in the context of the stanza. It is onomatopoeia. Remember, according to analysis, it is onomatopoeia. And as a result, we are saying the sigh is lost in the air, which contrasts with a joyful sound. It will not be heard at all because it is a breath expression, and as such, it will not be heard. That's why it will be lost in the air. Refer to line 3 to 4. For the said old earth must borrow its mirth, but has trouble enough on its own. Identify the figure of speech. It was personification without fail. And therefore, when we're coming in, comment on the effectiveness of the image, which is the personification. We are saying the earth is given qualities of being sad and old. Is given qualities of being sad and old. Now, when we're saying it's given qualities of being sad and old, we are saying that earth does not have any happiness. That's why it needs to draw on the happiness of others. From the strength of others. Right. When we say refer to lines 23 to 24, that's our 4.4. But one by one, we must all file on through the narrow aisles of pain. Critically discuss how these lines convey the central message of the poem. One of the things that we had to start with is the central message deals with we are alone to deal with our troubles. So as a result, misery, pain must be dealt alone. The comment we could have given was based on um, narrow aisle. Narrow suggests that it cannot accommodate anyone else. The journey does not accommodate anyone else. relationships based on conditions. If they are based on conditions, we are saying they will come to you only if it suits their condition. And therefore, the condition is if you have happiness, they will come. If you are in trouble, they will not. So, as a result, those are the things that we expected. So, as a result, that final line emphasizes that a solitary state is what is part of the human nature. Right, we move to our most problematic question. I believe my learners were crying foul when it came to the exam poem by Karen Pess. It says this is a poem for exams. There are three similes in this stanza. They are easy to spot as a dog getting ready to lift his leg. You have to look for the words like or as, the way you look for a hole to put a key into. But English has many ways of saying like or as, and this can confuse you just as you can be confused by the way the buttons are labeled on a new remote control panel. A metaphor can be bigger than the poem it's in. To find the metaphors in the poem, you must wake up to what's going on here. For example, an exam mark is a metaphor for the words happiness or despair. An exam poem is a metaphor for the process breaking the poet's heart. The rhymes and rhythms are easy to identify if you use your body like a brain and remember that the hero of the story was the child who said the emperor had no clothes. You may not find personification in the poem, but it's hiding there, staring back at you, waiting for you to come at it with your car crusher jaws, explaining, explaining, explaining. And I believe it says explaining it into the tiny buttered flat package, utterly silent. It's a poem trapped in an exam, just like you. If the two of you could only run away together. Comment on how the imagery supports the poet's attitude to the study of poetry as revealed in lines 6 to 8. I believe in line 6 to 8, we talked about, it says, but English has many ways of saying like as or as, and this can confuse you just as you can be confused by the way the buttons are labeled on a new TV remote control panel. All right. So when we're coming into the unseen poem, it says the imagery is a simile without fail. That's the imagery that we have. We have a simile, and we're saying the simile shows it's comparing comparing the difficulty of the meaning of a poem to a new remote. So as a result, that is very vague, confusing. So as a result, that's what we mean when it comes to poetry, right? Critically discuss the appropriateness of the metaphors in line 12 to 13. And I believe what was said is that the exam mark is compared to happiness. Exam mark compared to happiness. When we're saying it's compared to happiness or despair, I believe happiness or despair. And as such, what do we say? When you pass, you get joy and happiness. But failing brings despair and sadness. So as a result, we are talking about the over-analysis of a poem will break the poet's heart because it will take away the beauty of the poem. So as a result, these are the three things that had to be touched. Over-analysis breaks the poet's heart. The beauty of the poem is taken away. So those are the three things. How is the image of a car crusher Joe's developed in the rest of the stanza? I believe one of the things is that the car crusher Joe's refers to the over-analysis of poetry, over-analysis of poetry. So as a result, it makes young readers lose interest, and therefore the poem that is overanalyzed is now compared to a battered flat package. To a battered flat package, which means that its beauty has been completely deflated. So it becomes a useless piece of material or whatever. Discuss the impact of the final line. I believe one of them is that those who are not interested in poetry agree that you must run away from it. It's better to run away from it than to attempt to analyze it in an examination. So I believe the impact is that the impact of the final line forces the reader to take a side, either to read the poem or to run away from analysis in the exam. So there were two options there. So as a result, it's either you attempt it and read the poem and analyze it, or you will run away from it. Right, we move to our section B, which is the picture of Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray must acknowledge responsibility for his actions and his ultimate fate. We remember that we have to align ourselves to the P in the exam, and as a result, this is something that is called out for over and over again, that by now, we expect all learners to be really sealing in the peel so that they are able to touch on the exam as much as possible. There were so many things that you could have talked about when it came to the essay. Responsibility for his actions and his ultimate fate. I believe one of the things is that influence, consequences were things that were coming in here. So as a result, dire effects of influence, consequences were supposed to be touched. And I believe morality and immorality was also supposed to touch. So as a result, we are saying he must accept responsibility for his actions and the consequences of his actions. When we are at the beginning of the novel, Dorian Gray is portrayed as an innocent young man, beautiful, innocent young man. And as a result, this innocence is what makes him an easy target to the influence of Lord Henry Wotton, even Basil Hallward himself. So as a result, when we say he becomes an easy target and he falls for the influence, through the philosophies, Lord Henry exposes Dorian to, it encourages Dorian to now desire a life of pleasure and beauty above all else. He makes the Faustian bargain, and as a result, when he makes the Faustian bargain, he consciously now decides to adopt these views, and he now willingly lives a life of immorality. So as a result, his first choice is influenced by the philosophies in the garden scene, that he will grow old, he will not be young forever, which leads him to do the Faustian bargain so that the portrait ages instead of him. Now, when we look at the consequences of the influence that he has willingly fallen into, we realize that Dorian's wish for the portrait signifies that he wants to escape the consequences of his actions. So as a result, he engages in immorality, and that's where now we have his true nature reflected in the portrait. the more his sins are reflected in the portrait, the more the portrait becomes ugly because he's engaging in immoral activities. So now when we also talk about another incident is Sybil Vane's suicide. When he notices the change in the portrait, that is a line of cruelty on the side of the mouth, that was the beginning of his moral decline. He becomes increasingly corrupt, which leads to the ruin of many around him. And what do we mean? When we say the ruin of many, he rejects Sybil Vane cruelly. And I believe he was very cruel because he rejected it cruelly. And as a result, that shows his impact on others. Now, when we talk about the murder of Basil as well, we are talking about that he was in a state of hatred when he stabbed Basil because Basil made him realize that he does not know who he is in the portrait and is shocked. Basil's reaction pushes him to murder him, and as a result, that's where we realize the immorality and why he goes further in making sure his sins are hidden. So that Basil does not reveal the truth, he has to kill him, and therefore it means that his sin becomes hidden from the whole world. But now, when we talk about the issue of taking responsibility of his actions, I believe when we touch on the guilt and the contemplation of redemption, those are times when we say he tries to change, he desires change, and as a result, when we talk about the issue of Hetty, that he lets go and says, at least I will not hurt her and I'm redeeming myself for what I did to Sybil. We might say those are moments when he can show us the need to accept his consequences. But unfortunately, his attempts are not long lasting because they are just driven by a desire, a guilty desire to clear his conscience and not really to be remorseful. So when he realizes the depth of his corruption, we now realize that it pushes him to become paranoid. Paranoia pushes him to become desperate. He decides to destroy the portrait. So he believes it will free him or from his guilt and the burden of his sins. Ironically, when he destroys the portrait, it leads to his own death because the portrait now goes to its original state and Dorian bears the full consequences of his corrupted soul. And therefore, that shows that he could not escape his actions. So, as a result, when we're talking about influences, we have external influence, we have himself as an influence on his life. And that's why now it eventually leads all to his ultimate fate, which is his downfall and his death. So now when we talk about fate, we're talking about his death, we're talking about his downfall, because the moral consequences of not having, what do we call it, the conscience is what leads to his death. So that's what we mean when we talk about acknowledge responsibility for his actions. The portrait hides his sins and therefore is able to escape justice. No one can hold him accountable to it because the portrait is hidden in the upper room, in the upper schoolroom, and the key is in his pocket. And therefore, it means that it will bear the consequences of his actions. And therefore, I believe that's a Gothic element of the book where we're talking about it. Therefore, responsibility becomes difficult to happen to Dorian as the portrait absorbs his moral decay, allowing him to physically continue on a path of wrongdoings. So those are the things that we expect to have discussed in this essay. Hopefully, I think I was detailed enough. Let's go to the picture of Dorian Gray contextual questions. This was from chapter 2, and I believe in chapter 2, we're talking about this is Lord Henry and Dorian Gray. Coming back into the studio when Basil has finished the portrait. So this is after the garden scene. It says place the extract in context. I believe Basil, the portrait, has been finished by Basil. And he calls Dorian and Lord Henry from the garden scene. Lord Henry from the garden. From the garden. I believe the next thing is that Lord Henry has influenced Dorian, who is intrigued. Is it intrigued or captivated? Any of those two is correct, I believe. And I believe one of them is that whatever has happened is that Lord Henry made him aware that beauty, youth, and pleasure are a priority. Right, those are three things. In what way does this statement act as a foreshadowing? It will mock me someday, he says. It definitely was a foreshadowing because after the Faustian bargain, the picture absorbs the Dorian's sins. So I believe this is after the Faustian bargain. The portrait absorbs his sins. Now, when it absorbs his sins, it means that it mocks him when it becomes grotesque and ugly. And as a result, that's where he is filled with horror. So that's where the mocking comes in, when he is horrified, when the portrait looks back at him in its ugly state. He referred to line 6, it is the real Dorian Gray, that is all. Use this line as a starting point to discuss Henry's attitude towards Dorian. I believe the biggest one for me was manipulative. For me, the manipulation was ringing out as the attitude. He was very manipulative because what it does is to influence him to prioritize youth and beauty. Right. So as a result, I believe cynicism also comes in. Cynical can also come in because one of the things is that Dorian Gray is just a normal lad, young man, not the beautiful man in the portrait. So I believe that's what was coming in. We have 7.4, refer to line 23, it will be meta. Discuss the iron of Dorian's words in relation to the novel's end. I believe the novel's end will be chapter 20. That's where you have to always make a connection when you are doing context to say what happens in chapter 20. I believe that this is where Dorian has an awakening of the relationship between his soul and the portrait, of the connection between his soul and the portrait. So when he realizes that somehow the portrait is him, so when he does that, it now becomes a motivation to continue sinning and therefore making him become immorally corrupt. So now when we are in chapter 20, he destroys the pointing to rid himself of the ugly, grotesque curse, but unfortunately is ending his own life. So the irony is that he fails to recognize that connection when he stops the painting. So when he fails to remember that I am connected to the portrait, unfortunately he kills himself. So that's the irony. Right, we move on to the next question. Right, we have 7.5. Refer to line 1 to 3. That evening at 8:30, it says, by bowing servants. This is from chapter 15. How do these lines highlight the class divide in Victorian times? When we're coming to the class divide, I believe we're to come on the aestheticism part. The aesthetic part was the dress code, the expensive what is this one? Let's go to that line quickly. I believe it says Lady Nabara's drawing room. And I believe this is from line 1 to 3. Wearing a large buttonhole of Parma violets. And I believe it says, when we are coming in, I believe the description of the dress code, when we're talking about the fanciness, so we are going to talk about dress code, fancy attires, and I believe that's where the elite are seen. But now, when we look at the bowing servants, that's where we had a contrast. That's the divide. The bowing servants are showing the working class, and I believe that's where the division came to show the difference. So that was the servants, which is the working class. So now when we're coming into 7.5, to relate any other incident from the novel that further illustrates the class divide. I believe when we were in chapter 11, that's where we see Dorian's home when he does the exports of furniture and household items, which are lavishly decorated. And as a result, I believe that's where we can use the illustration to show wealthiness of the elite. And I believe we also are going to look at the Vane's home, where in chapter 5, the the couch is described as shabby. The chairs, the curtains were showing the sun through, which means they are old and ragged. So those are the two incidences that come into my mind at the morning from chapter 5 and from chapter 11. So I believe that's what we have. So as a result, Dorian thinks about appearing at the dinner without letting on that he has met at the men is playing a part. Discuss other evidence in the novel to suggest that Dorian blurs the lines between reality and art. I believe when he blurs the lines, it's falling in love with Sybil's art and not with Sybil, definitely. So that's where we are going to have the blurring of the lines. The Sybil issue is the first one for me. When we are going to talk about Sybil, being in love with Sybil's art and not with Sybil is definitely something that is there. He's in love with the character Sybil X on stage, and as a result, he does not fall in love with the actual Sybil. That's why he destroys her and is cruel to her because she became Sybil on stage. So that's something that we are realizing there when we come to art and reality. I believe the other one is after Basil's murder. That's the second incident that could have been used. So when we're talking of Basil's murder, he calls his corpse a thing. So as a result, he shudders when he looks at the ugly thing. And now it means Basil, who used to be a voice of reason for him, is diminished to a dreadful image. And I believe that's what he wants to do. So he wants to get rid of the it, which is the corpse, as soon as possible. So that's where I think we have two incidences of the blurring of the lines. Consider line 8. Those finely shaped fingers could never have clutched a knife or sin. Using these lines as a starting point, explain how the aesthetic values of the Victorian aristocracy cloud their beliefs. I believe one of the things we could have talked about is they find it impossible to believe that Dorian may actually have killed a man. So that's something that we are seeing there. They can't believe that the rumors, I believe also that Dorian is capable of having done this. And as a result, I believe his beauty was clouding them more than anything. Terrible pleasures of a double life. Critically assess the statement with regard to Dorian's moral decay. One of the things is the double life that we are talking. It has been a theme before in an essay question, I believe last year or last year, I can't remember clearly, but it's been one of the exams, and I believe it's not the first time to hear it. So now when we're talking about a double life, we're talking about the portrait, hiding, Dorian's immorality, and we're looking at Dorian continuing on a moral decline, purposefully. So as a result, when we come into the moral decay, we realize it leads to his downfall, because what happens is that he now is horrified by the image that stands in front of him at the end of the novel, and as a result, he destroys it. Now, when we're coming into the picture of Dorian Gray, you either choose the essay question or the context question. It cannot be both. So it means we have to answer one there and we cannot answer both. All right. So as a result, that's what we are supposed to be having. When we're in the life of Pi, we're looking at the essay question. Pi Patel's survival instincts and ability to adapt to his environment play a crucial role in his survival at sea. Critically discuss the validity of the above statement. Your response should take the form of a well-constructed essay of 400 to 450 words. Right. My apologies. The things that we can talk about when coming to this essay, I believe it's the instincts and ability to adapt and the role that they play in his survival at sea. I believe one of the things we need to talk about is how he is able to think quickly. So when he's able to think quickly, we are saying that becomes crucial to his survival in the sea. He has so much resilience, and therefore his resilience is the one that makes him sustain the whole ordeal. And I believe when his instinct to swim for the lifeboat and to save Richard Parker, it becomes his survival, because when he follows the instinct to swim, it means he survives. One of the things is what the father taught them as young boys at the zoo, which is to keep themselves alive, is what keeps him alive at sea as well, because when he fully comprehends and understands his loss, he realizes that he has to keep himself alive. When we look at the basic commodities and needs, fresh water, fish, shelter, we are saying he improvises. When he improvises and comes up with solutions, it means he's able to adapt to a new environment. So as a result, remember the crafting of the tools that he does to survive. And I believe that is what plays a big factor in when he understands I have to try and survive. And now that's where he's able to come up with solutions. He's able also to create a distance from the animals in the lifeboat. And as a result, that means he now is dominant to be able to train Richard Parker. He coexists with the tiger, and the coexistence, I believe, is what helps him to survive. He makes sure he draws a boundary and territory for himself and Richard Parker, and that makes automatically mutual respect and cohabitance happen for both of them. He uses Richard Parker to keep himself mentally awake and focused, and as a result, that works for him because he using his alter ego of Richard Parker becomes a coping mechanism that allows him to deal with the horrific experience as a whole. His faith and religion cannot be left out in this essay because he maintains hope as part of his ability to survive, drawing from his three religions, which come in handy. It maintains his sanity, and I believe it keeps him alive. The narratives, the different narratives and switching of narratives helps him to cope with being in a solitude. And as a result, he's able now to be creative, and that keeps his humanity and sanity intact. I believe he endures the physical toll of the experience, malnutrition, the numerous injuries, and I believe that is the biggest test for his survival. But through it all, he stays mentally sane despite the isolation, the horrific experience, and I believe that is awarded when he remains alive. So those were the issues that we could have dealt with and discussed. Remember in the pill again. So that's a discussion that could have been brought up. A lot of them were coming in as I believe we've just exhausted them. Let's go to the contextual questions. We were in chapter 40, firstly. We had the place the extract in context, and I believe it's the ship sinking. The ship has sunk. And I believe what has happened is that Pi jumps into the ocean. And I believe the other thing is that avoids drowning in the sharks. So those were the things that were standing out for us. Refer to line 1 to 5. It says, Richard Parker did not jump. I could hardly breathe. Discuss how the writer creates a sense of danger and panic in these lines. Right. When we're talking about danger, I believe one of the things is panic and danger. The writer creates a sense of danger. I believe it was the descriptions. The senses were awakened. Senses were alerted, I believe. Black and cold stung my eyes, pulled me down. So those are the words that really give the terror. I believe there was a struggle, there was terror that is coming in. Terror, struggle, panic. So those were the ones that we can now refer to. Comment on how the contrast between the physical environment and Pi's emotional state is highlighted in these lines. When we're coming into 9.3, the things that we're going to talk about is the chaotic environment. That's one of them. The chaotic environment is one of them. When we talk about the chaotic environment, we're talking about the weather, which is the storm, I believe. We're talking about the sharks. We're talking about the tiger. And as a result, when we look at the contrast between the chaotic environment and Pi's mental state, that's where our clues were. I believe what happens is that the chaotic environment has brought him to be alone, isolated, and now he has to use his instincts to survive. But now when we look at his mental state, he's physically injured. He's in what do we call this, a terrified state and is struggling to survive. And I believe that's where now we're talking about it brings out the trauma in him. And I believe when we come in, the instinct to survive is what automatically kicks in. How does the author highlight the theme of survival in this extract? I believe physical and mental struggles were very clear. Physical and mental struggles. When we talk about physical and mental struggles, we are talking about danger around him. When we talk about the danger around him, we're also talking about instinct to survive or fight to survive. So those are the things that we are bringing in. So when we come to extract D, right. Extract D is from chapter 57, refer to line 5 to 7. My breath slowed down, it says. My breath slowed down, my heart stopped knocking about in my chest, and I began to regain my senses. Now it says, what does this reveal about Pi's emotional state at this point in the story? One of the things that we're talking about is, I believe it's a calm after the storm. Figuratively, it will be the calm after the storm. What do we mean? He starts to calm down and overcome his fear. So I believe what we mean is that Richard Parker does not pose a threat to Pi, and therefore it means they will coexist. So those were the things that we are talking about. Discuss the irony in this statement, 16 to 17, it says, a part of me did not want Richard Parker to die at all, it says. So as a result, what is the irony? I believe Richard Parker is a threat, but Pi feels comfort from his presence, from his presence. So as a result, what does it do? He uses Parker as a motivation to survive and to continue being alive. Explain how the explanation about lion taming from previous chapters prepare the reader for Pi's plan to tame Richard Parker. One of the things is that when Pi explains to us how the lion tamer put himself in charge as the alpha animal in the ring, we now understand that the circus reference is what Pi adapts to. I believe it's adapting here. We are adapting to the circus incident, to the circus scenario. So when we're saying we're adapting to the circus scenario, he uses the same techniques to train Parker and establish himself as the alpha. So as a result, he's able to successfully train Richard Parker, and that's why the hierarchy now is established. How does the presence of Richard Parker contribute to Pi's survival, both physically and emotionally? It says, physically, I believe Richard Parker keeps Pi alert. He becomes alert, very cautious. And therefore, what does he do? He has a will to survive. That is physically, I believe. Emotionally, I believe it occupies his mind, which means it replaces the despair. Based on your knowledge of the novel as a whole, comment on the reason Pi has to tame Richard Parker. If he does not tame Richard Parker, I believe he will be in isolation or in solitude, but it also provides him with a distraction that helps him mentally alert, and therefore he does not focus on his loss. I believe in the second story, it becomes different. He needs his alter ego with him to fight for survival. So it becomes a coping mechanism in the second story, so that he, what is this one? He is not driven mad by the despair, right? Let's go to section C. I believe we're done with our novels. We are in our plays. And I believe in our plays, we are having Hamlet. And also, I believe it will be the Crucible. It says, examine the interplay between genuine madness and feigned insanity in Hamlet, focusing on how Hamlet's strategic madness contrasts with Ophelia's real psychological breakdown, and how these states reflect the broader themes of betrayal and revenge. There are so many things that could have come in. Yes, the question might have sounded difficult, but remember, you're just looking at the themes: madness, feigned insanity. So as a result, that's where we had to focus in betrayal and revenge. It was a loaded question because it had 4 themes, but as a result, let's see what we could have talked about. I believe what we are talking about, the feigned madness done by Hamlet is the one that allows the theme of betrayal and revenge to be successful. So when he decides to feign madness, he adopts the treachery, and therefore he's able to hide his true intentions so as to seek revenge for his father's murder. Now, when we're talking of Ophelia's genuine madness, now it differs because the Ophelia's madness is driven by her emotional suffering and the effects of Hamlet's betrayal, and the father, obviously, Polonius. So we have real madness and we have feigned madness. Hamlet's madness is calculated and planned, so which pushes the suspicion away from him so that he can be able to plot and observe his enemies at a close range. What does he do? He does the erratic behavior, the speeches to confuse those around him, especially the eavesdropping Claudius. And as a result, who now becomes paranoid about Hamlet's true intentions. So as a result, the calculated madness is a tool that he uses to be able to manipulate how others perceive him, where he can now be able to hide his true motives. To be or not to be, that is the question, I believe, shows his internal struggle. That's where we have the real question: was he really mad? Because now it shows the moral implications and consequences of his revenge, showing how complex his character is and how this weight is having a toll on him and his decisions. But now when we look at Ophelia, it's a tragedy because it's a consequence of betrayal that she experiences. And unfortunately, after the death of the father comes the rejection, and by Hamlet as well, it leads her to a breakdown. So when we come in, unlike Hamlet, Ophelia is Ophelia's madness is due to being vulnerable, and because of the expectations placed on her shoulders by her father and Hamlet himself, which unfortunately she cannot bear. But for Hamlet, it's a tool of revenge, and it's a tool of destroying those who are the enemies. And I believe that's where we have the two coming in. So I believe when we come in and talk about the contrast between Hamlet's madness and Ophelia's genuine madness, we are saying grief, betrayal, and death are dealt with differently by the two characters of Hamlet and Ophelia because their roles were completely different. So those are some of the things that we could have exhausted. A lot can be said, I believe. It just needs 5 or 6 points. I think I've talked about 8 or 9 to just open our minds of saying, know your place so that you can discuss them well. I've had the privilege of teaching all of them in different schools, so maybe that's why I'll be able to talk about them in detail. So as a result, let's open up our minds in the exam. Act 3 Scene 2, place this extract in context. It says, this was from Act 3 Scene 2, and I believe what happens is the conversation It's a soliloquy. Is it the soliloquy, if I'm not mistaken? It is the soliloquy by Hamlet. So as a result, we have to give the extract in context. I believe it is after the mousetrap, definitely. It is after the mousetrap. And I believe you are also going to give Claudius's reaction there. It also comes in there. And I believe also we are going to talk about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. What do they do? Inform Hamlet that the king, the two friends also at the third point. They inform Hamlet that the king is very upset and the queen wants to speak to him. Refer to lines 8 to 9. O heart, lose not thy nature. Let not ever thy soul of Nero enter this firm's bosom. Nero was one of the most notorious emperors of ancient Rome who had his mother put to death. Account for Hamlet's plea in all heart, lose not that nature. I believe one of the things is that Nero violently murdered his mother because she poisoned her husband. So Hamlet is now, I believe he is admonishing himself to be aware of his natural feelings as a son. So as a result, he must not allow himself to follow what Nero did. So as a result, it means that he must not do any serious action to hurt his mother. So that's what we must be able to give. He acknowledges that he is human, but he acknowledges that he must have a demarcation and align himself to not cross a boundary. To elaborate on the irony evident in these lines, I will not speak my soul concerned. All right. I will not speak daggers to her, but use none. I believe what is meant is that he urges himself and forces himself not to act, but he will only chastise her through words. Yet during the play, he scolds himself because he cannot translate any words into actions before. So as a result, we must be clear of the differentiation of what he thinks and what he does. It was definitely thought versus action. And it says, if you were the director of the production of Hamlet, how would you instruct the actor to deliver these lines? Justify your instructions with reference to both body language and tone. I believe it's anger. One of the things that is there is anger. Number one, what can be pacing around. I believe pacing around or hitting his fist on his palm. So as a result, that can be that, drawing his sword, imitating killing Claudius. I believe calming himself down, trying to curb himself from being Nero. So any of those were relevant. So you had a variety that you could have given. Extract F was from Act 5, Scene 2. Place this extract in context. This came twice in the plays. Oh my gosh. All right. Claudius and Laertes, I believe, are conspiring to murder Hamlet. This is the conspiracy. Definitely. We have to talk about the conspiracy. And I believe we are also going to talk about the jewel that must be brought. The swords must be talked about, whereby one will be sharpened with a poison, and I believe a goblet will be placed with wine that is tainted with poison. So as a result, that's what we're supposed to have talked about. And I believe also these are the things that could have come in. Friendly jewel and all the stuff. Comment on the significance of Hamlet's words in these lines. It says, I believe when we're coming in, it says he felt he was denied a title. So when he felt he was denied a title of being a king after his father's passing, I believe that is where we say procrastination is very clear and no action at all. So as a result, I believe this is where we're saying now he's active. And as a result, he shows his authority. And now he's no longer a victim and he's willing to put a plan into action. Explain what prompts Laertes' response. He is justly served. I believe Hamlet has wounded Claudius with a poisoned sword, and then has forced him to drink the last of the poison in the goblet to avenge his mother's death. So Laertes' comments is that Claudius has been given his punishment because he has been the one behind the whole duel plot, and as such now it means that he has been given his due. Discuss how Horatius' diction conveys his sentiments towards Hamlet. I am more an antique Roman than a Dane. I believe when we're coming here, loyalty, friendship, that's what we are getting. Love, my apologies, is also coming in. So those are the things that we're getting when we're talking of Laertes. So as a result, I believe the Roman soldier that he talks about is he committed suicide by falling on his sword if the superior died. So Horatio is compared to an antique Roman, which shows his high regard and loyalty to Hamlet as if he was a superior officer. And the last one says critically discuss how Hamlet's response signifies a shift in his character. I believe now we have a boldness in Hamlet. When we talk of a boldness in Hamlet, I believe what he's saying is he makes peace with his death. Acceptance is what we are dealing with. He accepts his death. And as a result, what happens is that he allows destiny to take charge. We go to the last question of the exam, which is the Crucible. In the Crucible, the lack of integrity and honesty has disastrous consequences. Critically discuss the extent to which you agree with the above statement. Right. I believe we have characters that lack integrity in the Crucible, which is why we have a tragic ending of innocent people. Reverend Paris is one of them. He is a minister, but he's he is selfishly focused on his reputation. So as a result, when the issue of the girls dancing in the forest comes out, he is worried about how his actions will impact on him than he is about the girls' behavior. He's not an honest man because after revealing to Abigail that he might have seen someone naked, he denies it in court later on, strangely. I believe he also tries to discredit Giles and Proctor so that he can try and secure his own position as a minister. He's very materialistic. So as a result, that's why we are saying he lacks integrity. I believe his actions do play a role in the tragedy that happens. What does he do? He wants to maintain his name, but at the expense of the deaths of others. People like John and Giles died tragic deaths because of him. And as a result, that's why we're saying he contributes to the tragedy. I believe we're also going to talk about Abigail. He has an affair with a married man. She's a liar, manipulator, threatens the girls. As a result, she lacks integrity because what she is the ringleader in the innocent people being accused at the court of witchcraft so that they can just avoid punishment and a whipping. Lying in court, making up stories about Elizabeth's charge, about the yellow birds, I believe makes us realize that dishonesty is part of a character. I believe she nails it at the end when she steals Paris's savings and disappears, leaving tragedy and lots of lives being lost. I believe the other one is Danforth and Haythorne, the judges. They lack integrity because they are saying they stand for the law, and represent the highest court in the land. But it's obvious that they are not fighting to remove the wrongdoings, but they are only trying to maintain their own positions and maintain power and authority at any cost, forcing good people to lie and confess to avoid hanging. They do not want to listen to any testimonies or look at the petitions. Um, they arrest anyone who speaks against the courts or goes against the courts. And as a result, they have been told several times that the girls are liars, but unfortunately, their dishonesty, their arrogance, their pride uh, makes justice not to be served. I believe the fourth person we can talk about are the Putnams. They lack integrity, they lack honesty. Why? Anna ends Putnam's motives of wanting the deaths of the unborn children to be justified is what makes us really worry about a character. She tries at any cost to make sure that she blames Rebecca because of just personal vengeance for the deaths of her babies, and therefore Rebecca is hanged because of her dishonesty. Thomas Putnam is greedy, behaves in a privileged manner, thinking his position should award him the status in society. Entitlement is in the Putnams, and as a result, which does not form part of the Puritan religion. Unfortunately, he lies in court when questioned about Guy's claim, and unfortunately, Giles dies because of Thomas's dishonesty. So those are some of the characters you could have touched on. Let's go to the context. Refer to lines 1 to 2, account for Rebecca's suggestion that Reverend Hale be sent back. I believe one of the things is the fact that Reverend Hale has a reputation. I believe it would create panic. So it will create panic, and as a result, what would happen? It means that the other people in society would now fear, and therefore it would cause chaos. So as a result, because of the Hell's reputation, it means that his reputation will just make people suspicious. And therefore, it means it will destroy the peace that they are struggling to have in Salem. Refer to lines 7 to 8. There is prodigal's danger in the seeking of loose spirits. Comment on this warning in the light of later events. I believe the warning is well proven. What happens is that personal vendettas become a priority. Not only that, people turn against each other. There is irrationality that dominates. And I believe we are saying loss of lives is also something that happens. Vengeance is at the highest esteem and personal issues. To what extent would you agree with Rebecca's opinion in line 9 that they should blame themselves for the children's behavior? I believe the adults would blame themselves. That's if you say, do you agree? Strict Puritan system is one of the reasons. So when we come to the strict Puritan system, it's the one that causes this. And when we say they are not allowed any freedom, they can't express themselves, the rigidness of the Puritanism is what makes them become rebellious. But if you say you disagree, I believe we are saying the children are to blame because they are vindictive as characters. They are not innocent at all. And as a result, they should be given responsibility for their actions because they knew what they were doing. So as a result, that's what we could have given if you wanted, because you could have gone agree or disagree. Account for Proctor's attitude towards Putnam in lines 20 to 21. I believe anger in Proctor is due to, what is this one? He becomes scornful to Proctor because to Putnam, sorry. Putnam wants to use his position and wealth in society as a, what do we call this? A leverage. So he wants entitlement. So I believe that's why it will be this way. He's only greedy for land. And as a result, that's why he's encouraging the witchcraft allegations and rumors. Extract H was from Act 2, I believe. It says in line 1, to what confessions is Elizabeth referring to? Definitely it was the confessions of witchcraft when we're coming in here. It was the witchcraft confessions. Place this extract in context. I believe the girls have been found in the forest. Okay. Rumors of witchcraft cause panic. What? Okay. And I believe the other thing is that Elizabeth wants John to go to the courts. Refer to line 8, or it is black mischief. Discuss the accuracy of Proctor's assessment in the context of the play as a whole. I believe this was an imagery question. That's why learners were lost. One of the things is that we were talking about being mischievous. The girls being mischievous, spiteful, revengeful. That's what we were talking about. That's the girls in the courts. So that's what we were referring to. Elizabeth is insistent that Proctor go to Salem, account for it. I believe what happens is that Elizabeth feels that Abigail will do anything to destroy her and get her out of the way, and therefore wants to avoid that. The second one is that John's reputation in Salem will have a weight at the courts, and therefore he will be believed. And I believe what's the other one is that Elizabeth hopes that the truth will come out that the girls are lying, and therefore stop Abigail in further causing damage in Salem. Suggest reasons for Proctor's thinking beyond this. One of the things is that his reputation was what he thought of. He knows if he speaks up against Abigail, she might tell everyone about the affair. But now he also wants to save his reputation and remain of good standing. Comment on the irony of Proctor's referring to Abigail, as I said now. Well, Abigail's actions are the opposite of what she is being seen as in the courts. Abigail's actions are nothing but devilish, manipulative, vindictive. She even has an affair with John Proctor. And as a result, it means that there is nothing pure and holy and goodly about her at all, or saintly about her. So as a result, luckily, we are at the end of our presentation. I hope this will open your mind to studying further, internalizing things in the exam, and making sure that you cross your T's